Episode 5 of Life, Larry and the Pursuit of Unhappiness, may be the boldest episode of the entire series. Rather than simply parodying historical events, it asks a completely ridiculous question. What if one of history's greatest tragedies was surrounded by the same petty arguments, awkward conversations, and social misunderstandings that have defined Larry David's comedy for decades? That idea sounds outrageous on paper, yet the episode fully commits to it. Instead of rewriting history, it imagines all the small, annoying moments happening around it. By the time the episode ends, something as harmless as a yellow scarf becomes one of the funniest and darkest running jokes in the entire series. The episode actually begins far away from Abraham Lincoln. Samuel L. Jackson introduces viewers to the famous gunfight near the OK Corral. Before the comedy even starts, the narration points out an important historical detail. The legendary gunfight did not actually happen inside the OK Corral itself. That correction immediately establishes what this series is trying to do. Rather than focusing on the polished version of American history, it wants to explore the forgotten details and the ridiculous possibilities hiding around famous events. The sketch introduces Lawrence, whose personality feels unmistakably inspired by Larry David. Almost immediately, he annoys everyone around him. His horse occupies too much space, irritating the Clanton gang before anyone even starts talking about guns. Instead of beginning with violence, the confrontation begins with a complaint that resembles someone arguing over a badly parked car. That is exactly the kind of humor the episode embraces. Even the famous gunfight becomes buried beneath scheduling conflicts. Rather than immediately drawing their weapons, everyone argues about the exact meeting time. Should they meet at 3 o'clock? Should they gather a few minutes earlier? Should the fight happen inside the corral or outside it? Lawrence then remembers he has other appointments and simply rides away, avoiding the entire confrontation. The sketch perfectly demonstrates the episode's central idea. History may remember legendary moments. People often remember the petty inconveniences surrounding them. The second and much larger story shifts to April during the final days of the American Civil War. With victory finally in sight after General Robert E. Lee's surrender, President Abraham Lincoln appears exhausted but hopeful. The nation seems ready to begin healing. Viewers already know exactly where history is heading. That knowledge becomes the source of almost every joke. Rather than treating Lincoln's final evening with solemn reverence, the episode fills it with the sort of awkward social interactions that Larry David's characters constantly create. The most important character introduced here is Lawrence Butterfield. His role seems insignificant at first. He encourages Lincoln to attend the theater performance of Our American Cousin. At the same time, however, Butterfield becomes obsessed with finding his missing yellow scarf. He immediately suspects that married Todd Lincoln has taken it. Neither he nor Lincoln wants to ask her directly because both know exactly how difficult that conversation will become. Instead of discussing politics or the future of the country, the two spend their time worrying about an uncomfortable conversation over a scarf. That contrast creates the episode's darkest humor. The audience knows John Wilkes Booth is already moving towards Ford's Theater. Meanwhile, Lincoln's greatest concern is avoiding another domestic argument. Before leaving, Lincoln even asks Butterfield to sit between him and Mary during the performance. He hopes Butterfield can act as a buffer and prevent another disagreement. Butterfield understands immediately that the plan has absolutely no chance of succeeding. Sure enough, the moment they arrive at Ford's Theater, Mary orders Butterfield to move elsewhere. The yellow scarf argument quickly returns. Butterfield insists Mary took it. Mary completely denies it. Lincoln once again finds himself trapped between two stubborn people refusing to communicate directly. One of the funniest sequences in the episode follows. Butterfield decides he wants to leave the theater box. Instead of speaking to Mary himself, he forces Lincoln to relay every message between them. The President of the United States becomes nothing more than a messenger carrying childish complaints back and forth. The comedy works because the behavior feels strangely believable. Everyone has witnessed situations where two adults refuse to speak directly and instead force someone else into the middle of an argument. The episode exaggerates that behavior by placing Abraham Lincoln in the most inappropriate position imaginable. Eventually, Butterfield leaves. Only after he is gone does Mary quietly remove the yellow scarf from her bag because she feels cold. That single moment completely changes everything. Butterfield was right all along. Mary really did have the scarf. However, proving him correct changes absolutely nothing. Instead, his departure leaves an empty space inside the theater box. Moments later, John Wilkes Booth enters. History unfolds exactly as everyone expected. This is one of the cleverest jokes in the episode. The series never suggests Butterfield caused the assassination. Instead, it imagines how an entirely unrelated argument accidentally placed everyone in exactly the wrong positions at exactly the wrong moment. The comedy comes from the terrible coincidence rather than rewriting history itself. After Lincoln's death, the episode moves forward once again. Mary Todd Lincoln becomes overwhelmed by grief. She refuses to leave the White House and cannot even bring herself to attend her husband's funeral. The newly sworn-in President Andrew Johnson now faces an unexpected problem. He has become president, yet he cannot properly occupy the presidential residence because Mary refuses to leave. Johnson therefore summons Butterfield. He believes Butterfield should convince Mary to move out. Butterfield immediately refuses. He reminds Johnson that Mary cannot stand him. Johnson responds with one of the episode's funniest observations. She dislikes practically everyone. That hardly makes Butterfield unique. Even during this conversation, Butterfield cannot stop thinking about the yellow scarf. For him, the missing accessory remains just as important as everything else happening around him. It perfectly captures his complete lack of perspective. Johnson also reminds Butterfield that he bears some responsibility for convincing Lincoln to attend the theater that evening. Butterfield awkwardly tries to comfort Johnson by pointing out that he has technically received a promotion. After all, he was vice president and is now president. The moment the words leave his mouth, Butterfield realizes how terrible they sound. Johnson immediately understands the implication. Butterfield scrambles to explain himself, creating yet another painfully awkward exchange. Everything builds towards the final confrontation. Butterfield visits Mary Todd Lincoln inside the White House. Rather than showing sympathy, he immediately handles the situation as badly as possible. He accuses Mary of exaggerating her grief. He suggests she simply enjoys remaining in the White House because of its luxury. Then he delivers perhaps the cruelest remark in the entire episode. He tells her she should have been performing at Ford's Theater because she acts so well. That comment destroys any remaining possibility of a civil conversation. The official request instantly becomes a deeply personal insult. Mary finally reaches her breaking point. She physically attacks Butterfield. During the struggle, Butterfield notices the yellow scarf once again. He immediately tries to reclaim it. Mary insists it belongs to her. The scarf that first appeared as an insignificant object suddenly becomes the emotional center of the entire episode. It caused the original argument before the theater. It indirectly led to Butterfield leaving Lincoln's box. Now it fuels one final confrontation. Mary wraps the scarf around Butterfield's neck and begins strangling him. Then she delivers the episode's unforgettable final line. She tells him to say hello to her husband. It is an incredibly dark punchline. On one level, it reflects Mary's overwhelming grief. On another, it represents years of anger directed towards someone she blames for constantly making already painful situations even worse. The scarf itself carries surprisingly powerful symbolism by the end of the episode. At first, it seems like nothing more than another petty argument. Gradually, it becomes proof that Butterfield's suspicion was correct. Finally, it transforms into the physical expression of Mary's grief and rage. It is no longer simply a piece of clothing. It represents blame, resentment, miscommunication, and all the unresolved emotions left behind after Lincoln's assassination. That full-circle journey is what makes the ending so effective. The episode turns the smallest object imaginable into the center of one enormous emotional payoff. More importantly, Episode 5 captures something Larry David's comedy has always understood. People rarely stop being petty simply because they find themselves inside historic moments. Arguments continue. Misunderstandings continue. Social awkwardness continues. Even against the backdrop of one of the most tragic nights in American history, the characters remain consumed by everyday frustrations. That uncomfortable contrast is exactly what the episode wants viewers to wrestle with. By the end, life, Larry, and the pursuit of unhappiness is not making light of Abraham Lincoln's assassination itself. Instead, it satirizes the ordinary human behavior surrounding extraordinary events. The yellow scarf becomes the perfect symbol of that idea. It begins as a trivial complaint, grows into an obsession, and ultimately becomes the object tying together comedy, grief, guilt, and revenge. The result is one of the darkest episodes of the series, proving that Larry David's unique style of humor can find absurdity almost anywhere, even in the moments history remembers with the greatest seriousness.